Good evening and welcome to the very first program in the 2015 Adult Summer Reading Program. Did you even know that's why you were here? That means you haven't signed up. The Adult Summer Reading Program is just like the Kids Summer Reading Program. It goes for 2 months. Adults have it a lot easier than kids, though. You sign up and you get one of these. All you have to do is read 5 books in 9 weeks, or you can read 3 books and come to 2 of the many programs listed on the back, tonight being the first one. If you haven't signed up yet, I can still give you one of these and you can sign up online, or you can go to one of the desks in the building and we'll sign you up. It's a lot of fun. At the end, you get registered for, there are 4 choices for prizes, so you get registered for that. But like I said, tonight is the first of the Summer Reading Program programs. The theme for the year is Everyday Heroes. And our program tonight is to learn how to be an environmental superhero. Our guest host is Lucy Hershberger, who is the founder of Forever Green Nursery, and she knows more about gardening than I can ever hope to know. So she's here to talk tonight about managing stormwater and rain gardens as part of that, not just rain gardens. So Lucy, I'm just going to let you go.
Wonderful, thank you. Well, thanks for having me. As I mentioned earlier, and you might have found out, I am always glad to get up on my soapbox and talk about stormwater management. I just think it's a really important issue. As she said, I'm one of the owners of Forever Green. And I always say I've been dabbling in stormwater for about 10 years, maybe 15. We started with rain gardens and have kind of been involved in the development of stormwater management throughout as the practices have changed, as we've learned more. But it's kind of been an ongoing process. And when they asked me to talk about being an environmental superhero, I kind of laughed. I thought, you know, you got to tie into the theme. And I thought, there's just no way I can tie into this theme. And then I had this brilliant idea, not being a big comic book reader, but I just happened to go to the Avengers movie. And it occurred to me that Iron Man, right? I don't know if everybody knows who that is, but he's the superhero with absolutely no real powers. All he really is a guy with resources. He has the equipment, the knowledge, and the people to back him up to get something done. And that's kind of what I thought about, is I thought, well, really, that's what we are. And my goal in doing these presentations is just really to kind of recruit people and spread and put out the information so that everybody understands that we can really make a difference without making a huge change. I used to be one of those people that walked around, I was going to change the world in some big, huge way. And now I've really come to the conclusion that what I'm doing is I'm changing the world 1 yard at a time. And we were talking about water flowing through people's yards and having some of the impervious surfaces and things like that. And one of the things we found out as we work with stormwater management is that we don't need to manage huge quantities of water. It's much more efficient to manage the smaller quantities where they fall on the ground. And what we're hoping is that people can take the time to learn about stormwater management. That's the first thing, to become an environmental superhero. The other thing is to pay enough attention to pick the right practice, because there's a lot of different options out there and not everyone suits every person. We also need to make sure that you design it and install it correctly, because every time we put in an effective practice, people see that and realize that it really does work and that it can work in their yard. But the reverse of that is every time we do it wrong or it's done wrong, people see that and go, well, you see, it just won't work. So it's really important that we have them designed correctly and installed correctly. Unfortunately, we also have to maintain them, which, as somebody who doesn't like to pull weeds, can be an issue sometimes. But the good news is it's not terribly difficult to do that. If you hire a company or work with a designer that's trained and certified in the practices that you're interested in installing. And I'm going to talk a little bit about those programs later. The first part of this really is what's happened over the last I'm going to say 100 years, as we've developed more and more and more. Previous to large urban areas, 70 to 80% of the water that fell on the ground was absorbed into the ground, percolated down into the aquifer, and then was just recycled. What's happened as we develop, we've increased the impervious areas, the areas that the water can't absorb into the ground, and that's what's caused the runoff. And we've almost flip-flopped that. We've gone from 10 to 20% of water running off to maybe 10 to 20% of that water actually absorbing into the ground. And that's what's really causing the most of the issue. To give you kind of an idea, I actually have another slide before that. There we go. This is my example of how much rain falls in a small development. This is about 4 acres, and just 1 inch of rain on the roof of a 40 by 70 foot home can produce 1,700 gallons of water. That means on a 10,000 square foot residential lot, you've got 6,000 gallons of water falling in a 1 inch rain. And that is a lot, but if you really want to know how much it is, you just have to look at a development. And if you look in the center of that picture, that's our little 4 acres that we were looking at originally. So just managing 1 inch of rainfall can have a huge impact on the runoff and all of the downstream results of having that runoff. So it's really important for us to learn how and to try to manage the rain where it falls. Because truthfully, there are consequences. Got to get these to switch. There's consequences from having that water run off, and some of them are small, but some of them are pretty big. And one is when we have runoff that goes through a lawn, a lot of times that runoff is going to carry the chemicals or fertilizers that were put on that lawn. And that's really damaging to the groundwater. Certainly that increased volume, if you can imagine that whole development dumping water into one stream, and a lot of times I use North Liberty as an example, because so much of the water that falls in North Liberty feeds into one waterway, which is Muddy Creek, and that water just goes up and down every time it rains. But if the creek banks can't hold that water, that's when we see the flash flooding. And those volumes can come up really fast in a heavier rain. But one of the most serious issues is actually not where the water goes on the surface, but it's when it does go into those creeks and we call it flash. The water goes up real fast and then drops down. And what happens in a creek when that happens is what's down in this bottom picture here is every time that water flashes up, it's going to erode those banks. And every time it erodes that bank, it carries the sediment with it downstream. So my example is Muddy Creek erodes, it goes down into the Iowa River. The Iowa River feeds into the Mississippi River, and the Mississippi feeds into the Gulf of Mexico. So what happens in your yard in Iowa City is directly impacting the Gulf of Mexico's issue with the dead zone. So you really don't think as much about, you see the runoff and we see the flooding and we all react to that, but such a big issue is just that sediment flowing downstream. And that's one of the things we really want to manage by managing that water on site. Because I'm a horrible horticulture geek and a dirt geek, and I tend to use sometimes words that people have never heard of because they're just not commonly out in the language. I figure I'll go through those first. You know, if you do have a question, let me know. But the key really is impervious surfaces. And we used to always talk about that as rooftops and concrete, because those are the two primary things that we see being an issue. But more and more with the development practices we're using, we're actually finding that our yards are becoming an impervious surface. And where those should be able to absorb water, because of some of the development techniques that we've used over the years, the topsoil is removed and a lot of equipment might have to be driven across that ground. That compacts the soil, and now the soil can no longer absorb that water. So that's one of the issues we're really working on trying to fix, which directly isn't, the next term makes sense then. The infiltration rate is how quickly the water can move down into the soil. And then the percolation rate is real similar, but it really means how quickly the water actually the rainfall or the water will actually go all the way down into the aquifer. So infiltration is how quickly it goes into the soil. Percolation is how quickly it goes through it. I'll talk a lot about BMPs, or best management practices. In stormwater management, that really means the best practice for the specific site you're on. It might be a rain garden, it might be soil quality restoration, rain barrels. There's a lot of different options, and we just always want to pick the best practice for that site. Water quality volume is just really a fancy way of saying the amount of rain that falls. That's how you calculate 1.5 inches of rain into how many gallons of water that is. And in Iowa, just to give you an idea, 90% of the rain that falls in Iowa falls in rainfalls of 1.25 inches or less. So what that means is most of the time when it rains, we get less than 1.25 inches of rain. And our goal when we first talk about managing stormwater, we talk about managing the first flush, which is that first 1.25 inches. And if we can manage that, we're managing the vast majority of the rainfall. A watershed, for those of you who haven't heard of that, is, my best example is the Iowa River watershed, is every stream or drainage ditch that ultimately feeds into the Iowa River. And if you picture a map, the watershed for the Iowa River goes about, I think it goes about 120 miles north and west from here. So there's a lot of water that actually ultimately feeds down into the Iowa River. And if you look at the Mississippi River, the Iowa River is the Mississippi watershed. So it just, as we move downstream, the watersheds get larger and larger and larger. Like I mentioned before, stormwater management needs to be practical. I mean, it has to work. It has to do what we want it to do. It needs to manage that first flush. But really, to get people to utilize those practices in their homes, or to get communities on board to encourage the practices being done, they need to be effective. I mean, they've got to work, which is why we really push the BMP philosophy. It needs to be practical. Nobody can really justify spending $10,000 or $20,000 on a practice just in their yard to manage a small area. Personally, I think they also have to look good, because ultimately I'm a landscaper and I'm a gardener, and if I'm going to put something in my yard, I don't really want it to be ugly. So it's important that we think about how it's going to look, and we need to look at that cost. The good news is a lot of communities have funds to help cost share for stormwater management practices. And I know that includes Iowa City, North Liberty, and Coralville. I know Cedar Rapids is working on it. There's a lot of communities that are on board. There's federal funds that are helping to pay for that. They're also using the stormwater fees, because by implementing these practices, they're reducing the need to enlarge the storm treatment plants. So ultimately, that's a saving for the cities. So really what I want you guys, my superheroes, to do is to kind of lead the way. The first class I ever took that talked about stormwater management, Wayne Peterson, who is one of the leaders in the movement in Iowa, there was about 40 of us in the class, and he said, if I can light a fire under one person, I will have accomplished my goal. And I tease him about that, because I utilize his resources a lot. And I say, hey, your fault, you started the fire. But that's what I want to do. If everybody who sees this does something, whether it's share the information or anything else, that's going to make a difference. So you guys are going to be my superheroes. And the practices I really want to talk about, because there's 4 that we use the most, that seem to be the most cost effective, and especially in a residential setting, are stormwater collection, which is basically rain barrels, rain gardens, and also bioretention, which I'll talk about a little later. Improving soil quality, which includes adding topsoil back onto lots and loosening the soil, or after post-construction, what we call soil quality restoration, and then even just planting natives, which can make a huge difference because of the deep root systems those have. So I'm going to kind of go through each practice and talk a little bit about the design and the installation and some of the benefits and reasons you'd want to do those. And the first one, because that's kind of, I know, what was promoted and seems to be one of the ones that's a lot of fun for people to do, is a rain garden. And for all practical purposes, really, a rain garden is just a garden that's downstream from a water source, usually a driveway or a downspout, that's a depression to collect the water and hold it to allow it to absorb into the ground. Pretty simple. I mean, that's, when you look at how a rain garden is designed, it's really modeled after a marsh. So in order to plan your rain garden, there's some math. I mean, everybody loves math, right? Our goal, again, is to design your garden not to collect a 3-inch or 5-inch rain, but to really gather that first flush. If you can collect that first flush, remember, you're going to collect 90% of the rain that falls. So the first thing to do is look at your roof or your area that you're going to collect off of. And we're, in our company at Forever Green, we like to use the Johnson County GIS maps. Most of the counties have them. You can get an aerial view of your house and measure the roof area or the driveway or anything else you want to measure. It's a great resource because you can really see your roof where you maybe wouldn't be able to do that from walking around the house. And then you need to figure out what part of the roof feeds into each downspout, because we've had people design their rain gardens for their whole roof and then realize that they really have 4 different areas that water's feeding out into. So you're going to do your measurement, length times width, and then you're going to figure your depth at that. Again, our measurement is that 1.25 inches, which is about 0.085 is an easy way to do it. That's going to get you your cubic feet of water. If you want to translate that to gallons, when we design our gardens, we use cubic feet, but it's pretty impressive when you start looking at how many gallons of water you're collecting. And that's 7.48 cubic feet per gallon, which if you look at the little thing down here, 1 inch of rainfall on a 2,000 square foot roof is 1,250 gallons. That's a lot of rainfall. It's pretty easy to design your rain garden to absorb a lot of rainfall. As a general rule, and there's a pretty complicated system to figure it out, but as a general rule, we usually, when we're starting out with our rain gardens, we usually figure 7 to 10% of the surface area that you're collecting is about how big your rain garden needs to be. So if you're collecting 1,000 square feet, you really only need a 100 square foot rain garden, as a general rule. There's some variations to that. But it's kind of nice, so really you're not talking about huge expanses of garden, which does make it easier to plan. But when you're planning your garden, there's a few things you really want to keep in mind. It's really important. Well, the first thing is your rain garden really does need to be downstream from your water source. As we all know, water flows downhill. But sometimes we sort of think about where we want our garden and we forget that it's not actually downstream from your downspout. So that can be an issue. But you want to select your spot, figure which downspout you're going from, put your garden downstream, but it also needs to be at least 10 foot away from your house, because your goal is to collect that water and have it infiltrate down into the ground. And there's always going to be porous material out, I think it's about 4 foot or 5 foot from your house. And if that water's going to take the easiest path. So if your rain garden's too close to your house, you can actually cause water to come back into your foundation. So that's really important that you keep that in mind. There's variations to that. Do we do questions now, or do you want to wait? Okay.
If you have a slab garage, would it not have to be 10 feet away if it doesn't have like a foundation?
Mm-hmm. The question is, with a slab, would it make as much difference? And it wouldn't be as critical because the water's not going to go, into the basement like it might in a house. But you still want to be aware that what might happen if that water gets up into the foundation. you know, you could go closer, but I wouldn't do a rain garden right up against the foundation of anything. So, so anyway, you're going to design your garden downstream. You're going to keep it away from the house. You can feed your rain garden. We call it a funnel is usually what we use. Most of the time you're surface feeding the rain gardens. So the water's just going to run across the yard and then run into what we call the intake, which is, you know, the area where the water flows in. You can also take your downspouts if you're running off your house and run those downspouts underground and have them surface in the rain garden. That's a matter of personal preference. There's different benefits and disadvantages to each, and it would just depend on what suits your house. You're also going to design your rain garden with an outlet. So the water's going to flow in. Your goal is to capture that 1.25 inches, but if we get a 3-inch rain, your garden's probably not going to manage that. So you need to have what we call a controlled outlet, so the water can overflow and run on down, usually across your yard. Those need to be well protected so they don't erode, because your garden will overflow at some point. So it's really important that you have that intake and then locate your overflow in a place that it's not going to cause a problem. You don't want to cause erosion. You don't want to feed it into your neighbor's yard. So you want to design that in a way that it's not going to become an issue. A lot of the overflows you'll see in some of the drawings we have actually overflow into a pipe that's maybe 8 or 12 inches up above the level of the garden. And that's a real effective way to do it too. Either way works, it just depends what you're looking for. When we do an actual design of a rain garden, this is a good example of a cross section. If you Google rain gardens and you look at pictures, a lot of the pictures from 4 and 5 years ago or longer than that, the gardens are shaped like a bowl. And that's not right. What we learned, or what they learned, is if the bottom of your rain garden is flat, the water level is even throughout the garden. When you have a bowl, you have one area that has water in it more than the other areas, and those spots were tending to die out. And the goal of a rain garden is to capture your rainfall and have it absorb into the ground and percolate down in 24 to 48 hours. So these are not designed to hold water. They're designed to capture it and percolate it, infiltrate it down into the ground. If your rain garden holds water for more than 48 hours, there's a design problem. But it's very important that the bottom be flat. And the way we design these is at the bottom point, at the lowest level in a basic rain garden, you're going to have your natural soil. We're going to till that up and incorporate some porous material is what we'll usually call. It might be compost, it might be some bark, and it depends on your soil types. So you're going to loosen that soil at the bottom, and you're going to incorporate some porous material into it. And then you're going to have usually about 8 inches of a real loose organic matter. And the actual mixes have changed as everybody experiments with things and we learn. Usually we're looking at about 1/3 topsoil, 1/3 compost, and 1/3 sand. The newest information they have, they're actually requesting that you use less compost because there's some concern that the compost might be leaching phosphorus out or some of the other nutrients out in the water as it moves out of your garden. So they're saying we maybe don't need quite so much compost. You know, again, it's a little bit fluid right now. We're still working on what truly the best method is as they're doing long-term testing on these. But so you'll have your loosened soil, your amended soil, and then you're going to have that 8 to 12 inch basin, which is going to be your retention for that water. On the sides, you need to make sure, usually we'll berm those up just a little bit above the surrounding ground. You need to be careful and make sure that all those berms around the edge are well reinforced so that if your garden does overflow, it doesn't erode. So it's really important to have, You know, you can do plantings and mulch. Some people seed their rain gardens or use plugs in the bottom. Around your base, around the berm, you may want to consider sodding that or using some erosion mat, something like that, in case we get a really big rain. I mean, you just don't want to have that kind of erosion. A lot of times we'll also talk about bioswales or bioretention. We're going more to the bioretention in residential or, you know, smaller commercial applications. It's a little bit simpler design than a bioswale. Really what a bioretention is just a superhuman rain garden. It's the same principle. It's designed to capture the water, absorb it into the ground, but they're used typically when we're capturing a large amount of water, like a big commercial parking lot, or a lot of times they'll use them when the soils aren't percolating well, when you can't get that water to go down into the ground. And what that allows you to do is capture the water and hold it. But if it's not percolating through, there's going to be an overflow, like they call that an overflow pit. Usually it's a drain that comes up above the ground that the water can flow into. But what it's also going to have at the bottom is usually a porous material, typically washed rock, like river rock or washed ballast, so that water can absorb down into that. When it flows down, it goes to the rock, and then there'll be a drain tile with a perforated tile with holes in it so that the water can absorb into that tile and run off. Because it's used when the water's not going down into the aquifer as quickly as we'd like it to, what this does is it allows us to capture that water, slow the flows down, get more of it down to percolate down without having standing water or having your soil get stale or saturated and get, you know, smelly. Yeah, sour, that would be the. And those are, again, most of the time in the bigger jobs. If you see, a lot of times you'll see those around parking lots where they're capturing, you know, 10 or 20,000 square feet, and they're getting a high volume of water, and they have to manage it in a little smaller area. But the fun part, once you have your design done and your garden in, you get to pick your plants, or actually you can probably pick them first. But a rain garden has pretty specific needs. And when we started designing rain gardens, we basically put marsh plants in them, thinking, you know, we had a wet area that was going to be wet. And what we found out is you really need plants that are tolerant of the wet-dry cycle, because when it rains, your rain garden is very wet. But when it doesn't rain, it's going to get pretty dry. So you need deep-rooted plants and plants that are really adaptable. I'm not a purist. Many people who design rain gardens believe you should always use natives. The advantages of using natives are that they are adapted to our environment. We know they'll survive well in Iowa. They're typically very deep-rooted. I mean, most of the native prairie plants have root systems that go down, you know, 2, 3, 5, sometimes up to 12 or 15 feet deep. And the advantage to that in a rain garden is those roots work like a straw, because they create a path for that water to follow to get down, deeply down into the soil. So they are important in a rain garden, because if all your plants are shallow rooted, you don't get that good vertical flow of water, or you don't get as good of a vertical flow. I want a garden that looks good. So, because ultimately I'm a gardener. So, for example, you'll see some pictures. This is the rain garden at Forever. Actually, both of those are the rain garden at Forever Green. And that garden actually has a combination of shrubs, natives, and cultivated varieties. We've played around with them a little bit to see what does well. But the nice thing about doing it that way is we know we have a good solid base of native plants with that deep root system to draw the water down. But we put some of the more cultivated varieties towards the outside of the garden, because they're going to be a little more compact, have a nicer shape, maybe a longer bloom time. And I like that. So that's how we did ours. But the nice thing is you can do, when you design your rain garden, you can pick the plants, you know, as long as they're suitable to the environment. Any plant that you like the looks of it works for your garden. The reason we use the limestone around the edge of our garden, ours is kind of an exception. The garden on the bottom is what's called a street collection rain garden. It's along Forever Green Road. And in order for us to get the basin, the containment capacity we needed for the rain, we actually had to go down below the level of the curb. I can talk about it a little more. I have another picture that's coming up, and it really kind of shows, but our garden's actually 2 to 2.5 feet deep, so it had to be really deep. We could have designed it without any kind of stone. This is actually limestone. We were just looking for a real sharp look. We wanted something that would be eye-catching and get people to go, oh, that's a really nice garden, and then we could talk to them about that it's not just a regular garden, it has a purpose. So you could design that same garden with just a grass slope going into it.
What are the cultivated plants in that picture?
Okay, let's see.
So I see them
In our garden, the plants change pretty regularly, just so you know. I think,
replant them, or
pardon?
you replant them?
Sometimes we do. We've over the 4 or 5 years that's been in, we've found some varieties do better than others. There's some issues with the street collection because you get a lot more debris and salt from the road. So some things will tolerate that. I think in this picture, I think some of the coneflower are more cultivated varieties like Magnus and ones like that. Some of them are just the purple coneflower. On the right side of that picture, oh, I have a pointer right here. These plants actually are Arctic blue willow. Which loves the rain garden, I must say. You know, honestly, at that point, what's blooming or what you can see, I know there's some iris in here, just the Siberian iris. I think they're here and kind of across the front, but they're not blooming at the time, so it's harder to see them. I'm trying to remember what else might be in there. All the grasses are natives, but we're probably 60% natives in that garden, would be my guess. And it's fun because it really does, people notice it. And because you typically can't put a landscape bed or a garden in between the sidewalk and the curb in the street right away, most cities won't allow you to do that. People ask us, well, how did you have a garden in there? And we're in the city of Coralville, and Coralville was really excited to be a part of it. When we started talking about it, they said, we'd love to have it there, we'd love to have that example. When we worked out how to make it work and have it be done well so it wasn't an issue with the streets. And we have a curb cut, and they just wanted to have input in how that was done, and I'll see them out there watching it fill up, so it's kind of fun. You can do any style. It can be a formal garden, it can be, you know, this one up in this top left is just strictly native grasses. I've seen rain gardens where it's a very formal garden, you know, which I was surprised, but it looked great and it was really effective. You can use trees and shrubs. There's no reason, as long as they can handle the conditions. And they also are very deep rooted, so they work really well in it. So really, any style you want, any kind of garden you want to plant can be a rain garden. It's just a matter of getting the design, the substructure design done well. This is kind of a neat example. This is a garden that Forever Green put in for Pennos, and it actually ended up that they needed bioretention because the soils were so bad in the yard they're in. They just had a heavy clay soil, didn't perk well. So as you look through this, try to do this without, as you look, you can see how deep we had to go to get that garden to work. She's collecting, I think that her garden will hold 6 inches or 3 to 6 inches of water if she needs to. But so we got the garden excavated, got the flat bottom, then we came in with rock and put the rock down. And we actually have tile under that rock. I guess we didn't get that picture. But so we filled with rock, and you can see, I guess this would be the wall, where this wall is over here, and I think in this picture. So there's probably 12 inches of rock down at the bottom of that. Then we came in with our amended soils. This pipe right here is the overflow, and what we did is when we were all done and everything was ready, then we cut that pipe off at the level, the depth that we would need that water to come up to. She has stepping stones through the garden because it's really important when you put in a rain garden, because you want that water to absorb down into the garden. You really don't want to be walking around in there and compacting your soil. So if you can minimize the amount you walk on the garden. So we got that all done, and then we put our plants in, and that's what her garden looks like. And when you look at it, you would never realize that the capacity to hold water that garden has. And my understanding of the last I talked to her, it has not overflowed. Maybe when they got that 8-inch rain, I think she said it might have, but really she has a lot of capacity. Oh, and there's another slide of that.
The one thing, I was at the talk where she was talking about the garden they had installed. Show where the pipe is in the full
Oh,
garden
yeah.
picture.
Oh, yeah, you're gonna make me find that again, aren't you? It's right,
Right there.
yeah, it's right in,
Green thing, right there.
there's just a little green cap.
When the water overflows that pipe, tell them where it comes out.
It goes out downstream, or down the hill, almost into a pond. I mean, so she takes that water all the way down to a retention pond. But it's a neat, I mean, it really is an effective technique to manage that water.
So where was the water coming from? Was it coming from,
It's coming off her roof
okay.
and across the, from the yard.
And why did she decide she needed to put this in?
I wasn't involved in the initial discussions. I just kind of watched it go in. What she was trying to do, because her yard, I think, drained down into like a retention pond or a pond. And she was having a lot of erosion issues, and she wanted to slow that water volume down. So what this really does is it's capturing that rush of water. And even when it feeds out, then it manages how it comes out, out of the garden, so that it doesn't cause that erosion. This is our garden at Forever Green, where it's street collection. And you can see in this bottom left-hand picture, that's actually the street with a curb cut. You can see just the edges of the curb there. And obviously it's raining, and that water runs down the curb, and it runs right into our garden. It flows through that rock path, and then it ends up in the garden that way. That's our intake. And then we have an overflow on the backside, just like everybody else. So our garden will fill up, and it's a little deceptive if you ever look at it, because it's got it looks like 3 separate boxes, but the limestone that runs through the middle of our garden is just our pathway to access it. It doesn't actually stop the water, because again, that bottom of your garden has to be level. So even though we're on a little bit of a slope at that point, the bottom of our garden is completely level when you run a transit on it, and it's all the same elevation. When our garden overflows, and I think we've had it overflow twice since we put it in, what'll happen is it'll just run across the grass and then back down into the next storm drain. So what we're capturing is water from Forever Green Road and some of the water off our parking lot. One of the advantages of collecting water off the street is when we talk about that first flush, that first 1.25 inches, the water, everybody says, oh, doesn't everything look nice and clean after the rain? And it's true, it does. And if you ever really want to know what runs down into the storm sewer, come out and look at the entrance to my rain garden after a big rain, because everything on the street runs into our rain garden. But the advantage to that is, if we have plants that can tolerate some of those pollutants, because if your car drips a little oil on the street, little rubber off your tires, my favorite, they throw their cigarettes out the window. All of those things, when we get that first inch of rain, get washed right down, and the world looks clean, but unfortunately it's all washed into our waterways. But what the plants and the soils have the capacity to do is filter out most of those pollutants. If you think about the water that's in our aquifer, you can drink. I drink out of a well. I mean, it's clean water, And as long as there's with some exceptions, the soil and the plants have the ability to remove most of those natural pollutants and purify that water. So by getting that water down into the ground instead of letting it just run off into Muddy Creek, not only is it preventing the flashiness and the pollution in the rivers and streams, but it's replenishing that aquifer with drinking water for us. So, the one thing I learned about rain gardens when I started, I have taken the rain garden certification class at least 2 times. Maybe we might even call it 3. Just because I'm involved in the program, so I'm going to all the programs, or many of the programs. And what's been interesting over the last 5 or 10 years is seeing how we've progressed. And the first thing you need to do if you're going to learn is admit you made a couple mistakes. So the mistakes we see made most often, initially it was that curved bottom. Now we know to be flat. But when we talk to people who do their own or new companies putting in rain gardens, the biggest thing to do is you have to do what we call a perk test, or test your percolation rate. And to do that, you dig usually a 12 or 18 inch deep hole, and you fill it with water. And then you just see how quickly that water is going to move through the soil. And if you come out in 24 hours and it hasn't gone down at all, you might have an issue, and then you need to really look at, bioretention, or maybe that's not the spot for a rain garden. If you do like we did, this is things you should never admit in public, right? When we did our perk test, before we excavated, not realizing how deeply we would have to excavate at our street collection. We didn't account for the curbing, so we had to go down another 12 inches. And where Forever Green is located, we sit on sand. We have about 2 to 3 feet of topsoil, and then we hit a sand vein. So as soon as we punched through that topsoil, we perked like crazy. So we could probably hold 10 times the water. We've like I said, we've only overflowed twice, and that includes the 8-inch rain. So, but that perk test is critical. We've talked to people who said, oh, I did a perk test over here, and it perks great, so I know it'll be great over here. And they put a garden in at both ends of their house, and this one is effective and it works really well. The other one they ended up having to take out because they realized the soils were just that different, in that 40-foot different space. So you need to do a perk test everywhere you put in a rain garden. The next biggest mistake we see people doing is improper sizing. They'll try to put too much water in too small of a space. Of course, improper design or installation, can only be effective if it's done correctly. Poor plant selection, which to me is just, it's a little bit par for the course, because what might do really well in my rain garden might not do well in somebody else's, because it's going to have more to do with your soils, how quickly you're perking, the amount of rain we get that year. There's just a lot of variables. Sunlight. So as a general rule, I tell people when they're putting in a rain garden, you can expect some of your plants to just not be well adapted to that area. So you might lose 20% over the first few years. And what I usually suggest is plant a wide variety. Get a good variation in there, 5, 10 varieties at least. And if you lose 2 varieties, either try something different or put something in that's done well already. So, and the biggest problem we see is the same problem that you see in any other garden. It's just if you don't it's something that's going to need maintenance. If it's a rain garden, it's like any other garden. Not necessarily any more maintenance, but you've got to maintain it. You have to pull the weeds, you have to remulch, you have to replant anything that dies. And if you don't do that, it just can't be effective.
How much mulch do you put on?
Typically, to mulch a rain garden, we recommend 3 to 4 inches of mulch. So just the same as you would in another garden. The Iowa Rain Garden Manual is what most of the communities in Iowa use as their guideline for cost share programs. So if you're going to put a rain garden in and you follow the information in the rain garden manual, the chances are you'll be doing it correctly and will qualify for cost share. It's a great resource. It's actually a book, but it's online too. You can't get it at all. I figured it wouldn't last very long. So right now it's available online. It's a great resource. And the nice thing about it is that way it's free. And they're not spending their money. The reason I like to put this slide up is if you ever wonder if stormwater management is important, you've got the Iowa ISWEP, which is the Iowa Stormwater Education Program, the Department of Agriculture, DNR, the NRCS, many of the counties, and Rainscaping Iowa, all different government entities working together, which you almost never see, to put this out and to make sure that the education is done. So I figure when you've got county, state, and federal organizations working together that closely, they realize how important this is. So it's a good resource. The next one is stormwater collection systems, which I kind of laugh because I had somebody tell me, I have this we found this great new thing, you know, we're gonna get a rain barrel. And I sort of laughed and I went, yeah, my first house had a cistern and it was a 120-year-old house. So, you know, I figure ever since we moved into caves, we've probably been collecting rainwater. It's the simplest form of stormwater management you can come up with. We were talking earlier, I was in New Mexico on a mission trip and they had been in an 8-year drought. And the house that I worked on, she had beautiful flowers. And I know they not only had watering restrictions, they limited how much water you could use per family. And at that time, and I said, oh, I lost my screen. I said, how do you get all these plants to grow? And she said, oh, I have 2 rain barrels at each corner of my house. And she could ration that water enough to water all her plants. Oh, oh, that's okay. Just wake it back up. I think I mentioned I could destroy a computer from. Well, anyway, I'll just look at the screen. The nice thing about stormwater collection, it can be that 55-gallon drum, or it can be a 5,000-gallon tank under a parking lot. For the most part, stormwater collection is still being used to water plants and outside uses, things like that. But more and more we're seeing people using it for what we call gray water use, you know, maybe for doing laundry, for flushing toilets, things like that. There's even a few places where I've seen they have put in stormwater collection systems with really, really intensive filtration so that they can drink it. So in theory, from your house, you can gather enough water for your gray water use. Most communities aren't quite there yet as far as zoning to let you bring outside water into your house, but you could certainly use it and wash your car. You can water if you want to water your grass, you can water your grass with it. You can water all your outside plants with it. It's going to be clean if you have a little filtration on there. The thing we talk about when we start planning a rain barrel or a water harvesting system is you really need to think about how much water you need. I know a lot of people that just put up a 55-gallon barrel at their downspout, which is great. It gives you some water to water your plants outside. The problem is if you aren't watering a lot of things, you're not going to empty that barrel very often. If you are watering a lot of things, and if you're an avid gardener, 55 gallons doesn't go very far. The other thing we found is, remember those water volumes I talked about. 55 gallons of water is a very, very small area for a 1-inch rain. So I've got the calculations up there we have a big rain barrel, stormwater harvesting tank, in front of our store at Forever Green. We put it up front because, again, we wanted people to see it and go, what in the world is that? What we wanted was, we did a calculation. We put in the summertime, we have plants out front. We put pots of flowers, and sometimes we'll put trees and shrubs out there, and we didn't have a hydrant to water them. So we were going to run a hydrant out there to water, and I thought, well, hey, why not? Why not try something different? So we just did a quick calculation. We went out, and we know what the pressure is on our hose, so we figured out how long it takes us to water everything. We could calculate how much water we needed, roughly. So we figured we needed about 1,500 gallons to water for about a week, week and a half. And remember, we do have a secondary water source, so if we run out of water, we're okay. And in order to gather that much water, if you look at the picture on the bottom, if you look at this picture on the bottom right, our building here is 100 feet by 25 feet. So we collect approximately a quarter of that area. So we're only collecting a quarter of the potential. And my favorite question to ask, I do a lot of elementary and junior high kids tours, and my favorite question to ask those kids is, how many inches of rain do you think it takes to fill a 1,500 gallon tank with this little bit of our roof? And they'll say, oh, 15, 20, 100 inches, depending if they're kindergarten or not. We will fill our tank with 3 inches of rain. So it doesn't take much to fill it, which leads us to the next important thing, which is design. One of the key things when you do any kind of stormwater collection is you need to have an overflow. And your overflow really needs to have the capacity, the same capacity as the intake. So if you've got a 4-inch pipe coming in and a hose going out, when you get a heavy rain, it's just going to come right over the top. And the risk of that, especially with a smaller system like this, is again, now you've got water right against your foundation. You don't want to get water in your foundation. So there's a couple things you want to think about. One is, you need that overflow, and that's really critical. The next thing is you probably want a way to shut off the flow into your rain barrel. Because if your rain barrel's full and we're in a period where it's raining, if you just keep dumping water in there, it could cause a problem. And one of the best ways to do that is this is kind of a neat little spout. You open it up and it gets the water out into the barrel. And then when your barrel's full, you just push it up and close it, and it goes right back down into your downspout and then runs away from the house. And that makes a really big difference. It works really well. You just have to remember to put it up. The other important thing is to have some kind of filtration system or screening on the top of your barrel, because the water that's coming, if you're coming off your roof, the water that's coming off your roof is going to have some debris. It's not so much that it's bad for the water as it's just dirty and you got to clean it out, so it's a whole lot easier to have that screen on top. If you have a closed system like this, most people will either put some kind of screening up in the gutter, or they'll just have a little screen right here that they can use. I've also seen it screened before your outtake, where you pull it out to use it. If you've got a closed system, you don't need to worry about mosquitoes at all. You're not going to have any issue with mosquitoes getting into that tank and laying eggs. Mosquitoes don't like to go into a dark place and lay their eggs. So if you have an open barrel, they might get in there and lay, but anything that's dark, you really don't have a huge issue with them going in there. But with a barrel like this where it's open, we'd recommend screening so you don't have mosquitoes. It also takes 72 hours for mosquitoes to hatch and come out, depending on the there's a lot of variables, but they can breed pretty quickly. So if you have an open container, you just need to empty it every 2 or 3 days, and then you get rid of those larvae. This is kind of a nice example too. This one, like on our barrel that we have, because we need a lot of volume coming out. We can't just use the natural pressure. So we have attached a pump to ours, and we just use a regular sump pump. So we'll go out there, turn on the pump, and we've got lots of pressure. We do that because when we're watering, we're trying to get a lot done quickly. If you're trying to hook up to a drip line or something where you need that even pressure, you can use that kind of pump system for it, and that'll keep your pressure even. If you don't do that, what you really have is just water trickling out of a hose, and you need to move that around. You can't count on it running a soaker hose or anything like that. So, But that kind of gives you an idea what goes into putting in a rain barrel, the simple part and the more complex part.
On our rain barrels, I have 8. We put, you cut into your downspout and you just come off with a little 1/2-inch hose. And I don't need an overflow because you can't get enough pressure in there to make your
Yeah,
rain barrel overflow.
that would work, just using a smaller hose
Yeah.
so that there's not as much, it's not just all the water pouring in there. And once your barrel's full, it's probably enough pressure to keep it from back and
Right.
overflowing,
Yeah, that's
which
what we
would be real efficient. And that way you don't have as much coming in and out of it.
Yeah, because
So.
we have ours underneath the deck and we don't want them overflowing.
Yeah. And it's the same thing as putting a rain garden next to your foundation. If you divert your downspouts so that, you should have them running away from your house, but if you do anything to change that flow and they overflow up against your foundation, you can get a lot of water in your house quickly. The other one is planting natives. Again, incredibly simple. It's just one little thing. And because of those deep root systems, that water will flow down into the soil, percolate down in more quickly and more efficiently. And I love this picture, even though it's unfortunately not as clear as I wish it was. See, I got to learn these things. So if you look at this, these are all different native plants, and the root systems, they show how deeply they go. 12, 15 feet is what a lot of these are. This one right here, this is bluegrass. So if you want to make a comparison for lawn grass, this is what bluegrass does for our yards. This one down at this end is buffalo grass. So if you're considering seeding a lawn, or if you have a new yard and you want to seed something that's going to be better for stormwater quality, deeper rooted, so it's going to require less watering during a drought period, and also still look nice. There are 2 really good options. One is buffalo grass. There's some issues with that. You want to be really careful if you're seeding buffalo grass for a lawn. There's lawn varieties that look nicer. But there's also a grass variety called turf-type fescue. It is a nice improvement on bluegrass because it is much more deeply rooted. It still looks like a nice lawn grass. Most people wouldn't be able to tell the difference. But your root system's going to go deep. They need less water in a drought period. They have less fertilizer requirement than bluegrass. But you also, because you have those deep root systems, you're going to get more percolation and absorption down into the ground with those types of grasses. Yeah.
How deep are those, and is that what this low grow,
No mow.
stuff is?
I'm not sure which varieties are in low grow, no mow, but it is some of the turf type fescues in those. I'm not sure exactly how deep the root systems are, but I know they're 12 inches or more. So they're going to go, which is 2 to 3 times what bluegrass is. I mean, the bluegrass is just not, it's just a very, very shallow rooted system. But the nice thing about prairie grasses is, about planting natives is, just like in the rain gardens, you can plant a prairie if that's what you want. But if you're in an average yard, just planting 2 or 3 natives can make a big difference. You've got that deep root system. They also have a lot of other benefits. They're going to support more of our native wildlife, more birds, more butterflies, more bees than a lot of the cultivated varieties as a general rule. And one of the nice things is, again, there's a new, Tallgrass Prairie Center is connected with UNI, and they have implemented a new program. It's the Plant Iowa Native, which is a great information source. If you want to see, they have good information on the advantages of planting natives, some information on different varieties, and a lot of links to other good resources. So it's a great resource. They're also working on a program to get into the garden centers and label native Iowa natives, so that if you come into Forever Green, for example, you can walk around and there'll be a little sticker on the plants that are Iowa native plants, so that if you want to try to select natives, you can do that, which I think is great, because so often people don't know what the natives are, and it just, or maybe they are choosing between 2 plants and And that might be the one thing that would influence them. But this is a great program, and they've been working on it for quite a while, and I think it's going to help to kind of get the word out and get the information out for people. These are all natives, and these are all ways to use natives in your garden. And I put, of course, again, everybody thinks plant natives. I have 10 acres of prairie at my house. It's great. I love it. But I really wouldn't want it in my front yard. I mean, it's tall, and it's weedy, and it's messy, and it's got all kinds of wonderful wildlife in it, mice and snakes and things that make sure I wear my shoes. But I can take a lot of those same plants, the coneflower, the black-eyed Susan, the coreopsis, and incorporate those in my regular garden beds up in my yard. Still have a beautiful garden, but I've got those deep root systems. I can also select trees that are natives. River birch is a native to Iowa. It's going to do well in a lot of our environment. It's hardy, it's disease resistant, certainly red oaks. Not that native trees can't develop problems like, the emerald ash borer and things like that. But as a general rule, we see a lot less of those disease and insect problems on the natives. So if you're planting a variety of plants in your yard, just think about incorporating those natives, and it can make a big difference. My last one is soil quality, or soil quality restoration. I'm going to see if I can do this without standing so far up. So when I talked about impervious surfaces, whoops, I didn't mean to do that. When I talked about impervious surfaces, I mentioned that we're running into problems now with our yards are becoming impervious surfaces. There was a state push, and a lot of local communities now are requiring developers to put 4 inches of topsoil, some places even more, back onto the yards when they develop those properties. Unfortunately, what we were seeing is a lot of this in the past. And really, this is a better example of it. If I blow this picture up, you can see that right here, the clay is gray. And what that means is that there is no oxygen to that soil, which means it's actually subsoil. And it was just, it isn't that nobody cares, they really just didn't understand the impact of bringing those subsoils up to the surface. And the problem is, because the soils are fine, they get compacted, there's no air pockets that allow that water to go through. So when we talk about soil quality, what we're really ideally doing is trying to get, at the time of construction, get those soils loosened up and get topsoil reapplied. It's the least expensive way to do it, and it's the easiest way to do it. And I think we're going to see more and more developments going in with that requirement as people become more aware of the importance of it. If you have a yard where it's especially compacted clay, or sometimes even older yards just over time have become compacted, that water can't absorb into your yard. And it's also hard on the grass, and there's a lot of other issues, but the primary reason we're doing soil quality restoration is to get some aeration down into those soils and to get good quality compost into the holes, which actually what we do is we go in with a deep tine aerator. Our goal is to get 6 inches deep, which is your average lawn aerator may only be an inch or 2 deep. So this is a special aerator with extra weight on it and extra long tines. Because they found when they started doing the restorations that they would use regular aerators, and it just didn't go deep enough to have the impact they were looking for soil, for the ability for that soil to absorb moisture. So what we'll do is we'll go over those yards with a deep tine aerator, usually 2 or 3 times, and then actually spread compost back over the top of that. And you have to spread such a thin layer so that you don't kill the grass. So what we're looking at is this machine's running over those lawns, pulling those plugs, and it needs to pull plugs. It's going to pull those plugs out, and then we're going to spread 1/4 to 1/2 inch of compost. Some people will use topsoil, some people will use like sphagnum peat moss. Compost is nice because it's reasonably inexpensive, and it's the most, it's got the highest organic matter, and our goal is really to get that organic matter back into the soil. And you can see that's not your average aerator right there. And we put a big guy on it, and that gives us an extra couple 100 pounds. But what you end up with is a yard with all those holes punched. And then we go over it with a spreader that spreads the compost. And one of the hardest things to get this program going throughout the state was to figure out, in the past we would see people out there literally with shovels, throwing compost out of the back of a truck and then raking it out, which was better than nothing, because that's what we had. And then somebody came up with this awesome little green machine, and it spreads an even layer. You can adjust how thickly you want it. So if somebody says they want a 1/4 inch, you can do a 1/4 inch, you can do a 1/2 inch. And in theory, you could do more if you wanted to. But what we found is, a general rule is that 1/2 inch is about the maximum you can put down at a time and not kill the grass. So that's kind of what we use that as our gauge. It's gonna look like, you can see where it's spread on the soil, and we get a lot of people after we do it that call us and go, oh, it's too deep, you know, and it does. It looks like somebody just spread dirt on your lawn. But over time, that dirt works, or the compost works down into those holes and down through the thatch, and it just adds a little layer of black dirt to that soil. It is very important to do it when it's cool outside, or it's best to do it when it's cool outside. We typically will we call them SQRs. We'll do our SQRs in April and May. We try to do it when the temperature's below 70 degrees. So we'll start in April and May, and then we'll pick them up again, maybe the end of September, first part of October. It's nice to do them in the fall, because that's actually the best time to aerate your lawn. And there's a little less likelihood that we'll get those hot days. Sometimes in May, you'll be, May 10th, it'll be 60 degrees, and 2 weeks later, it'll be 90, and, that happens. But yeah, on an average, I think on about a 10 to 12,000 square foot lawn, probably on average, it's about $1,000. And bear in mind that ideally we'd like to see 2 inches of topsoil on a lawn to collect that first flush. So we're only putting a 1/4 inch down at a time. So we typically recommend a few applications, but one application makes a difference. I mean, your yard will look better, you'll need less water, less fertilizer to have a nice green lawn. Plus, it's also got that ability to absorb some of that water. You can put more down at a time and then overseed. I mean, that's also, we've had people who have really bad dead patches in their yard, and they've just chosen to overseed their whole yard. And instead of, we'll still do the deep tine aeration to try to get that clay broken up, and then just go over with 1 inch or 2 and seed. And we've had good luck doing that too, so, yeah.
So what you're doing here is you're basically providing a very thin layer so you can grow some bluegrass.
Or it would work for any type of
Well, I was
grass.
gonna say, well, if you want to grow something deep-rooted, like even just these fescues
Mm-hmm.
and buffalo
Yeah.
grass you were looking at, will they grow in that, or are they going to hit this clay and stop right there?
Nothing's gonna like the clay. I mean, and that's been the problem
That's
is,
the question, is there any way to break up the clay
you can,
with plants?
to break up the clay, it's hard to break it up with plants.
Okay.
I mean, more in a garden setting with some of the stronger rooted plants, if you can get like the natives, or, even really any garden plants, if you plant them over time, that's gonna help to loosen the soil. But if you've ever had to garden in clay, unfortunately, nothing likes clay. I mean, it's not typically, when you go out into, if you go out into the native soils before we disrupted them, the areas that were clay had a much more limited palette of plants that grew on them.
Can I ask you, weren't there parts of Iowa that were clay? I mean,
Oh, yeah, yeah.
Or the Midwest, that this tends to be a clay soil area?
There are actually a lot of areas that the native soil either had a very, very thin layer of topsoil,
Okay.
or virtually none at all.
And so what plants will grow in that condition?
I'm not sure what would be the ideal. If somebody comes in and talks to us, we have things that we know do better in clay, and things that won't tolerate it at all. And I can talk to you about that more afterwards if you like.
Yeah, it doesn't
Um,
remind me, I'm just thinking
yeah.
of this stuff, it's like, this is a real problem. I mean, when we came to Iowa, I was looking for this black gold, and then we bought our house, and there's nothing there,
Yeah.
North Liberty?
And,
you know?
and I talked a little bit about, how the development techniques we use removed a lot of topsoil. And I think in a lot of developments, that's what happened. But there's also a lot of developments that really didn't have any to begin with. I know in Coralville, we talk about that kind of Northridge, Holiday Road, Northridge, Southridge. Those areas just have horrible clay soil. And I don't know, I haven't looked at the soil maps, but those were never good soils to begin with. They were highly erodible. The chances are, as they were farmed over the years, even more soil eroded off. But I think those were kind of clay hills to begin with. And we also see a lot of the wooded areas are actually pretty heavy clay soils. I mean, that's not uncommon. Sometimes we call it timber clay. That's what we call it. But
What this will do is it'll at least give you a lawn,
Mhm.
do a modicum of soaking something up.
Exactly.
But then will that last, or will it improve over time, or do you have to keep repeating this?
What you apply initially,
Yeah.
that improvement that you get from your first, if you just do one application, you'll see an improvement, and that improvement will be, it won't go away, or at least not that we're aware of for as long as we've been doing them. So that soil isn't, it's never gonna, that soil that you put down there, in there is 6-inch deep
Right.
compost,
Plugs.
is always gonna be better soil than what's around it.
But it's not gonna improve beyond that?
It's not gonna change the clay. But what it does, because by aerating, it allows as our ground freezes and thaws, the ground moves. It's actually kind of fluid, so that ground is moving. And the more air pockets you provide, the more that clay can move and make more air pockets. And those air pockets are actually what allows the soil to hold moisture. And it helps your plants to grow, because your plants need the air pockets to get the root system, allow the root systems to move and provide oxygen. So it's going to help and probably have some kind of improvement over time. The ideal would be to maybe do it once a year for a few applications.
$1,000 an application?
Yeah. I mean,
Every year?
yeah, it can get expensive. The good news
See why they
is,
take this to the legislature.
yeah, and that's been the issue. But what's really made a difference too is those cost shares I talked about earlier. The North Liberty, Coralville, Iowa City, a lot of those other communities will cost share. Every program's a little bit different, so you would need to talk to your own community, but most of them will cost share up to a limited amount, sometimes $750, sometimes $1,000, and they'll pay for 50% of any approved stormwater management practice. And like I said, every community's a bit different. So some might pay for rain barrels, some have done rain barrel programs, some will do rain gardens and soil quality restoration. And most of those communities will cost share more than one program. They usually will only do one program a year, but they will let you do repeated practices. So you might do a rain barrel one year and soil quality restoration the next year, or 2 years of soil quality restoration. It can make a big difference. But what it's really done is, for those people who have horrible clay soil, it's given us a way to just make a few improvements. And you're going to see that improvement with, if you're watering your lawn when it gets dry, or running irrigation regularly, you'll use less water, you'll need less fertilization, because that compost can hold the nutrients where the clay can't. So you have less nutrient runoff, and it means that those grasses are using those nutrients like they're supposed to. So it has a huge advantage. It's also probably a third to a quarter the cost of a rain garden. So it's actually less expensive than some of the other practices, which is good. And I don't want to say as a general rule it's more effective, but because it's your whole yard, it may not have the capacity of the rain garden, but it goes over a wider area, so that can make a big difference. Ideally, those of you who know me know I would love to debate the 4-inch rule where the contractors are required to apply 4 inches onto this existing, onto an existing yard before they sod. I think it'll go to that as we realize what the cost is of not doing anything, both to the homeowner and to the environment, to the cities. And I mean, there's a lot of costs involved when we just shove that water downstream. And it's more than just environmental, it's also stormwater, the water processing plants and flooding and things like that, so. I can talk about that afterwards, how's that? Again, the Iowa Stormwater Education Program, which is called ISWEP, is Iowa's best resource or a very good resource in Iowa. They do training for people like me. That's how I was trained in this. Whoops. That's how I got trained. Like I said, I've taken, we have trained and certified. You take usually a half day to a day class, and then you have to pass a test, and then you have to submit examples of your work so that they can see that you have the knowledge to actually implement the program. So it isn't, we don't just get to go sit through a class. We actually have to pass the test, show design examples, and then you'll get a certification, and they certify in each one of the practices. So you can find certified rain garden designers and installers, people certified in the soil quality and soil quality restoration and native plants and in rain gardens. And the advantage to that, and it's a fairly new program, so when it started there was 2, 3, 4 people certified. So if somebody in Iowa City, we certified, so there was somebody here, but there was a lot of areas that didn't have certified installers or designers. But now as you start to look at the number of people, most of the larger metropolitan areas have people who have taken the time and have the interest to be trained and to be installing these practices, installing the practices properly. And it's nice because they also offer continuing education. So for example, I took my first rain garden class 5 years ago, and it's a whole different, it's almost completely different now. They also offer programs for homeowners and city staff, engineers, so they're trying to get that education across the board so everybody knows about those. And they do a lot of on-site work, so you can actually walk out and look at those practices, which is great. They're working primarily in the education area. They are not the lobby organization, but I know they're working to help get that information out, so our politicians know what the situation is. And those websites are rainscapingiowa.org and iowastormwater.org. And both of those organizations, or both of those websites, have a lot of great information. So now we're back to my superhero thing. So you guys are all my superheroes, right? So really the simplest step to this is, you can make a difference. The idea is keep the rainfall where it falls. We want to reduce the runoff as much as possible. We may not be able to reduce a 3-inch rain or a 6-inch, or keep a 3 or 6-inch rain on site, but if we can do that 1.25 inches, remember we go back to that 1.25 inches rain is up to 90% of the rain that falls in Iowa, so you're going to manage most of it. Share what you guys learned today. Tell your neighbors, if you put a practice out in your yard, be willing to show it to people, because people really aren't aware of the advantage to them and the advantage to the environment. So the more we can get that word out, the better. Talk to your representatives. If you live in a city that doesn't have a cost share or doesn't have a program in effect where they can effectively reward contractors for using good practices when they develop, encourage them to do that. Tell them you think it's important, because if you believe it's important, they're going to start to believe it's important, because we all vote, right? The other thing is my biggest one is get out and enjoy the waterways. If you're out on the river, if you're out on the lake, you're going to realize how important it is. And I think to know something, you have to, to enjoy something or to care about something, you really have to know it. So it's important that we do that. And always keep in mind that 1 inch of rain on your roof is 1,200 gallons of water. It's a lot of water. So I guess thanks for coming and listening to me today.
Thank you for coming.
Oh, you're welcome.
Turn on the microphone. Hold on.
Oh, okay. Oh, questions, yeah.
That's okay.
Yes.
Thank you.
Oh,
Okay, we're-
I'm sorry. She's going to use a
Yeah,
microphone.
we have to use a microphone so that people at home that are watching can hear your questions.
We're hearing a lot on the news about the dead zone in the Gulf of Mexico and how Iowa is at fault.
Mm-hmm.
But the fingers I was pointed at the farmers. Do we have any way of knowing how much of that problem is from urban sources?
They're doing a lot of studies on that. I don't know myself, but I guess my philosophy is, I think the farmers are contributing, but I also think urban is contributing. And when we spend our time saying, it's not me, it's you, nobody solves the problem. But if instead we said, again, it comes down to, can I change the whole world? No. But if my yard is not part of the problem, that's a small percentage, but when everybody starts to incorporate these practices, all of a sudden we are collecting a large area. And I think it's a different type of problem, because the urban runoff is not so much what it does when it runs off your yard or off the street, but it's really what happens when it gets down into our waterways and that damage it does to those creeks and rivers, and where we see a lot of erosion is. And I use the Muddy Creek example. That water flashes up, and when it rains, Muddy Creek will come up 3 or 4 feet every time it rains, even in a small rain, because such a high volume of water is being channeled into such a small body. So it all impacts, I guess.
The other part of it was what they're saying on the news, is it's the fertilizer, the pesticides, the insecticides, and
All those-
herbicides are causing that dead zone. You're suggesting it's the sediment runoff, which is kind of different.
It's a combination and how they react with each other. What happens is when sediment is in the water, it has more capacity to hold those pollutants, whereas your clear water can't hold the pollutants as well. So the sediments increase they increase the amount of pollutants that are in the water. They also reduce the oxygen level, which contributes to that problem with the dead zone. So it's a combination of both. It's not really one or the other. So I feel the same way about microphones.
I was reading an article about the chemicals on the lawns and stuff, and they say an average homeowner uses about 10 times the amount of chemicals on their lawn than a farmer does on his field.
That's possible.
And is there some way we can get people to stop doing that? I can't figure out why people do that. I maybe I just don't understand lawns, but to me, all they need to be is green. And if you use a mulching mower,
Yeah.
problem solved.
What
What am I missing here?
And it's kind of a complicated issue, because like a bluegrass lawn has a high nitrogen requirement. You need to fertilize. If you don't fertilize your lawn, it's probably not going to be as healthy. And then as it becomes weaker and weaker, you can see more weed problems and other insects and disease coming in, where people might want to treat that. So our goal is always to educate people. You want to fertilize the least amount possible. And it's the same thing really with the farmers. The goal is put on exactly how much fertilizer your lawn actually needs. So if you're just putting fertilizer on all the time, there's going to be more likelihood of runoff. But if you put exactly or close to the amount your lawn actually needs, your lawn's going to be as healthy as possible. Root systems will go deeper. It'll be able to fight off the weeds, so nobody's spraying for the weeds. So it's kind of a balance, and a lot of it is that education. if people really understand the impact of every action they take, then hopefully we can get people, no, you shouldn't be fertilizing your lawn once a month. But it's probably also not good to never fertilize it. So you need to find that balance in the middle and do it the best way possible. When we talk about managing plants as a general rule, we talk about integrated pest management, where you use the right plant in the right spot, proper care, proper maintenance, and that will prevent a lot of the disease and insects. And that's probably the technique we need to recommend people use with their lawns, is that. The good news is, you know, they're not putting the phosphorus down like we used to. They found that was leaching pretty heavily, so that helps. So.
Now, one of the things I wanted to point out and why I went back to this slide, the root systems of prairie plants, this poster, it's actual poster size, but it's all over the internet. If you Google the phrase root system of prairie plants, not only can you read the foot markers to the side, but it names each of those plants. You have purple coneflower, you have prairie clover, you have 3 or 4 kinds of grass, a mallow. I can't remember all of the things that are in it right now, but if you look at it online, it's real clear, and it tells you, you know, this version of a purple flower has 17-foot roots. I mean, think about that. And it's just a pretty little purple flower.
I need your help then, because what I found was I can find out for native plants the amount of sun, space, blah, 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 height. They don't list the root depth.
No, they really don't.
And I've gone to these posters, and the plant I wanted to plant or was considering was not on the poster.
Yeah.
Okay, where can I find that out? This is a library.
All right, do you know about the biome website?
I've
With the
looked at it
native
once or
plant
twice,
biome, I'm gonna get it wrong, but look up native plants and biome, and you'll end up at this huge database of plants. And you can click on a specific plant you're looking for, and it'll tell you all about it. It'll tell you the root depth. It's just amazing. It's hard to find, but once you find it, you'll be there for hours. So,
Look out, right?
yeah. But this poster, I want to say, is available for free from the Iowa DNR.
I think it is.
Yeah, and but I ordered one thinking it was small, and it's a
It's
really
it's a
big poster,
poster.
but it's really neat to look at. So.
And I think the other thing to think about is, you know, there's a benefit from a 5-foot root system, and I don't know that we've ever really studied is it twice as good if it's 10 feet. So really, just even getting something that's 5 or 6 feet instead of, you know, 8 inches.
And I'm a lazy gardener. I garden by color, and I want a purple plant. If I know that purple coneflower has a root system like that, and it will survive a drought, and it'll do good, I'll plant that purple flower instead of the one with the little roots.
Yep.
Well, thank you so much for coming. This was a great
Well, you're
program.
welcome. Thanks for having me.
And like I said, she's from Forever Green. If you have more questions, they are always there, and they love to talk gardening.
And you're always welcome to stop in, and if there's something you have a specific question about, you can always ask to talk to me when you come in. So I'm not always available, but you can always ask. So
Thank you very much.
Oh, you're
and thank you
welcome.
all for coming.